Hi, and welcome to the Eco City Girl podcast. I'm your host, Samaya, and on this podcast, we explore what it looks like for urban Black and Brown experiences to be centered within the environmentalist movement. On this episode 2, we will be directly answering the question of what does sustainability mean? Literally just defining it, and ultimately building up to discussing in future episodes what does sustainability that centers us look like. So, sustainability, I feel like I most often hear it within the environmentalist context, but it's important to note that you can use that word out of context and it still pretty much means the same thing. And that's exactly what I'm going to be doing first and foremost, because I think sometimes sustainability, even for someone who already knows the definition, it can be kind of like an overwhelming thing. So out of context, it is often used to refer to an approach in which we can't really expect long-lasting results. So, for example, people often say, fad diets are not sustainable. And what is meant by that is, certain extreme diets, trendy diets. You might be able to get into them for a while, but in the long run, you're not going to be able to continue living it as a lifestyle. Another context that I often hear the word sustainable used in is in the context of finances and the economy. If we're just talking about personal finances, if you're regularly spending more than what you make, then often people say that that's not sustainable because you might be able to get away with it for a while, but eventually the debt is going to accumulate and grow, and you're just not going to be able to continue living like that. And so with these definitions and examples in mind, when we talk about, the environmentalist context, it's pretty much the same thing. It's not, at least definition-wise, it's pretty much the same thing. Basically what we're alluding to when we say that, we need sustainability, we need to live more sustainably. What we are saying is, one, we are not living sustainably now, which means that we are living by means. We are living and doing things. We are using the earth in ways that we might be able to get away with right now, but we aren't going to be able to continue to do. And then the second thing that we're saying when we say that we need sustainability is we need ways in order to live, approaches, rules maybe, in order to continue living on this planet and continue using the environment. So that's just what it means in the simplest terms. But I did want to kind of give a more official definition. And so I looked up the United Nations Brundtland Commission back in 1987, defined sustainability as, quote, meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs, end quote. And this is mirrored in almost every environmental science textbook that I've had that I can remember, which is basically saying that we need a way in order for us to live now that will allow future generations, our children, grandchildren, etc., to continue to be able to take from the earth, use the earth, live on the earth. Yeah, that's it. It's basically just how can we continue sustaining life on earth, because as it is now, it's not sustaining, and it won't continue to sustain life if we continue going about life in the way that we're living it today. And this is for a lot of reasons that we're definitely going to be unpacking, especially once I start getting into more of the science of what is climate change and etc., how we even got here. But without even going that back, without even going that far back in history, if we just want to look at ourselves, because sometimes I think we get bogged down and we think, oh, in the past, and we're moving to clean energy and such. If we just look at ourselves and the way that we're living currently, our day-to-day lives, the everyday things that we use, we are currently, at least here in the developed world, even with the best of intentions, we are living at a point beyond our means. And this can be best compared to, the finance example that I had given, which, just to reiterate, if you are spending more than you're making, then you are not living in A, stability, but also B, sustainably, because you're not going to be able to keep that up forever. And if we just think about how we take from the earth, how we use the earth, that's essentially what we're doing. We take and take and take and take and take. And the earth, as it is now, is just not able to remake and reprovide at the same rate, in the same way that we are taking. We are basically taking faster than the earth can give. And you may have heard of fossil fuels or non-renewable resources, etc. There are certain things that you can directly take from the earth and you can expect pretty soon will come back. So for example, if you pick an apple from a tree, you can expect by next season, by, next year, that tree will probably give you more apples. That's predictable. But some of the other things that we take from the earth, like fossil fuels, especially, the earth doesn't make more petroleum. The earth doesn't make petroleum oil, natural gas, coal every year. Not even every 1,000 years. And the speed at which we're taking it is not enough for the earth to replenish it. And that is essentially what we mean when we say that we are living unsustainably. And that's really important because it is definitely very context dependent when we talk about, what is living sustainably, what is not living sustainably. But before I get into that, I do want to point out that obviously in future episodes, I'm going to be going more into depth, especially about the causes of climate change and such. But it's important to understand that our unsustainable living not only connects to climate change because it has caused it, but also it continues to keep us every single day from resolving climate change. And this is why it's so important whatever field you identify in, whatever space you're taking up in society, whether you're a scientist, an economist, a politician, just a mother, a homemaker, an artist, etc. You as an individual should care, because it's not just about one area, but sustainability and sustainable living implies a sustainable lifestyle. It's not just about one singular act. We have to look at the whole budget, not just where are we taking resources, but also how are we spending. And I think this is best kind of understood by everyday people when we talk about money, because, you have to consider not only your spending, but your saving and your income and investments and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. When we think of it more like that, then we have room to bring in all kinds of people from all different types of backgrounds to bring in their perspective on how can we fix the budget? How can we fix the balance for us to continue living on this earth? And that kind of goes against, I think, what we kind of discussed in the first episode about the stereotype of what an environmentalist is, which is a tree hugger and someone who only cares about directly protecting things like a forest. It's beyond that. It's not enough to just look and focus in on one thing. It's of course important for us, wherever your passions lie, whatever your expertise lies in, for you to focus on one area. But it's always important for us when we talk about community, because this is a community-centered podcast. because this podcast is about community-centered thinking, for us to consider the entire budget, not just individual things that we're adding or subtracting. And as I said earlier, the definition of sustainability can be very context dependent, which is, again, why we need to consider the entire budget, because what we consider to be something that derails us and keeps us from continuing to live on Earth may depend on where you are and how you come into looking at this budget, and also what you consider to be a priority. The first thing that usually comes to mind for me is the controversial debate surrounding indigenous communities that hunt or, consume animal products in any other way. This controversy stems from there being a lot of data that supports veganism and vegetarianism, just basically straying away from animal products as being, better for the environment. And that is definitely true. That is definitely valid. There's a lot of benefits to being more plant-based for the environment, not just for your health. There's a lot of data that supports that. I would say, I don't think I've ever come across an environmentalist who strongly believed otherwise. But like I said, sustainability is very context dependent. And when we talk about indigenous communities hunting, for example, we're not talking about them consuming animals first and foremost in the same way that other people in the developed world do, but especially us in like more urban majority of color communities do. We can break this down entirely in a different podcast episode, but in the simplest way that I can for now, we consume a lot of like factory farming of animal products, whatever shape that looks like, whatever that looks like. And that is completely different from smaller indigenous communities that not only hunt, but, make it a point to try and use every part of the animal. And often those same communities don't have the same access to animal products that we do. It's completely different. And that's kind of the point that I'm trying to drive home, is because sustainability is very context dependent, the approaches have to be context sensitive. And kind of coinciding with that, I want to talk about greenwashing and define that. So greenwashing is similar to, I don't know if you're familiar with the term pinkwashing, or, similar terms to that, which basically allude to some sort of essentially propaganda being put out that X, Y, and Z is good for the environment, good for the queer community, good for Black and brown people, good for insert marginalized community, when in reality, if we critically analyze and take it apart, it doesn't do the work that it needs to do on a systemic level to break those barriers and undo that justice and get us the justice that we need. So if we're talking about pinkwashing, for example, things can be set up to look like this is great for the queer community, but if we actually unpack it, it supports all these other power structures such as capitalism or white supremacy, etc., that maybe at best supports some elite membership of that marginalized community, but does nothing for dismantling the actual power structure that upholds homophobia. The same can be said for the environment. There are so many, even just ads, saying like, this product is sustainable. This is this is like a green initiative that you should be a part of. This is whatever. But if we actually critically analyze it and take it apart, we find that whatever they're promoting in some way, shape, or form might be actually hindering those most harmed by climate change, those most doing the most to protect the environment itself. And along with that, upholding like all of those power structures that have led us to where we are with the environment: capitalism, colonialism, white supremacy, etc., etc. And I'll definitely be detailing this more in future episodes, and I might even do a breakdown of certain extreme cases of greenwashing. But for now, I think the most important takeaway for everyone listening is to know that what contributes to the success of greenwashing campaigns lies in exploiting the framing and the answer to the question of what is sustainable. If we don't, as a community, understand what sustainability is, if we don't stand on sustainability being context dependent, if we don't stand on sustainability therefore also needing to be context sensitive, then we will continue to be vulnerable to the exploitation of other people above us within the power structure, exploiting that definition and defining it however they want to promote whatever agenda that they want. As we go into more detail in future episodes about specific things and specific areas in which sustainability policies are promoted, we'll gain a better idea of how to, avoid falling into that trap of greenwashing. But I think for now, on surface level, the biggest thing that I think is helpful is considering yourself. It's always good to come back to ourselves and consider, okay, if someone is telling me like this is a very sustainable thing, that this is something that we should be doing to help protect the environment, how does it fit into my life? Is this something that I can not only do one time but like continue to do? How is this something that could fit into my lifestyle? Is this something that is accessible to me? Is it something that makes sense and aligns with my values and my community's values? And then on the flip side, considering the other things that kind of are the opposite, like how is this not accessible? How is this not accessible to me? How is this, if there are any ways in which it goes directly against my values, my community's values? Yeah. And I think also, ultimately, safety is also a very big thing as well. Is this something that I can safely go about? Is this something that I can, not just as an individual, but also on a community level, is pushing for this going to compromise my safety? And if so, how does that hold up on the other side? Like, is it still worth all of those risks? Is it still worth, the inconvenience? Is it still worth, maybe adapting our community values in some way, or letting go of maybe bad community values that we have? All of these things are really important for us to consider and really, really think deeply about before we go about endorsing and promoting any green policies, any green initiatives, any green plans, because we want to do our very best to avoid falling into that very, very deceiving trap of greenwashing. And of course, always asking ourselves, not just to ourselves, but, whenever we're with other people in community, what does centering us within the definition of sustainability look like? Because, it's great to do the work to critically analyze and take apart and do everything that we can to stop greenwashing, but it's also equally important for us to be doing the work not just reactively, but proactively, and putting out our own ideas and putting out our own images of what sustainable living that centers urban Black and brown lifestyles and experiences looks like. It's a balancing act. We need to be doing both. We need to be critically analyzing anything that anyone's pushing on us, and at the same time coming up with our own vision of what does life that centers us look like, and advocating just as hard as all those problematic people are in our communities to get our vote. So that concludes our second episode of the Eco City Girl podcast. You can find other episodes, including our first one, on Spotify and YouTube, and you can find additional resources on Threads and Instagram.